Blinking salt from her raw eyes, she listened to the radio crackle with grown men begging for an airstrike on their own position. Command ordered a retreat. Instead, she shoved the throttles forward, tasting old copper, and dragged the heavy, grinding titanium beast down into the fire. Cassidy swallowed hard, trying to pop her ears. The cockpit of the A-10C Warthog smelled like stale coffee, sweat-sour Nomex, and the faint, metallic tang of avionics baking in the sun. Up here at 15,000 feet, the sky was a bruised, indifferent purple. It was peaceful, quiet, save for the steady, washing machine hum of the twin TF-34 turbofans. Down there, it was a slaughterhouse. Hog 1-1, this is Viper Actual. Be advised, we are taking effective fire from 3, -4 elevated positions. We are pinned in the draw. I have 2 urgent surgicals. We need you down here yesterday. The voice belonged to Adler, Senior Chief Adler. Cassidy remembered him from Coronado, a slab of a man who chewed tobacco like it was a food group, and spoke in a low, unstressed drawl, even when someone was screaming in his face. She remembered earning her trident alongside men like him, grinding through the surf, her body breaking down, proving she belonged in a brotherhood that didn't want her. She had been one of the first women to pin on the Budweiser. She knew Adler. She knew his voice. Right now, Adler sounded like a man who had realized he was going to die in a wet ditch. "Copy, Viper," Cassidy said, her thumb hovering over the mic switch. Her voice sounded thin in her own helmet. "I see your strobes. Stand by." She banked the heavy, ungainly jet, squinting through the canopy. The terrain below was a jagged scar of limestone and scrub brush somewhere in the deep, unmapped folds of a hostile border. Thick, gray clouds hung over the valley floor, masking the ridges. It was a bowl of soup, and the seals were at the bottom of it. Her knee throbbed. A parting gift from a bad static line jump 5 years ago, the injury that had eventually grounded her from the teams and pushed her toward flight school. The brass had loved the PR, a female SEAL turning into a CAS pilot. To Cassidy, it wasn't redemption, it was just a different way to stay in the fight. But sitting in the padded seat, her bladder aching from 4 hours on station, her flight suit riding up in the crotch, she didn't feel like a poster child. She felt tired, nauseous, and deeply irritated by the throbbing ache behind her right eye. The radio hissed again. Not Adler this time. It was Samuel. "They're bracketing us. Get that fucking bird down here. Where is the air support?" "Oh Jesus, Briggs is hit. Briggs is hit in the neck. I need a medic up front." Cassidy felt a cold spike of adrenaline punch through her exhaustion. The background noise on the transmission wasn't the usual rhythmic pop of distant AK-47S. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a DSK 12.7mm anti-aircraft gun. Maybe 2 of them. They were chopping the SEAL's cover to splinters. "Hog 1-1, this is Overlord," a slick, unhurried voice piped into her headset, the AWACS controller, sitting in an air-conditioned tube miles away. "Be advised, the valley is a no-go. We have confirmed radar spikes. SA-8 geckos in the AO plus heavy AAA. Cloud deck is too low. You drop beneath 5,000, you are in the engagement zone. Abort your run. Repeat, abort. We are spinning up a rescue package, ETA, 40 mics. 40 minutes. Cassidy looked at the fuel gauge. She had enough loiter time for maybe 20 minutes. By the time the rescue package arrived, Adler, Samuel, and the rest of the platoon would be dragged through the mud, their gear stripped, their bodies paraded for cell phone cameras. The SEALs were apex predators, the best the military had to offer, but bullets didn't care about a trident. Lead and gravity were the great equalizers. She keyed the mic. "Overlord, this is Hog 1-1. I have troops in contact. They do not have 40 mics. I am commencing my run." "Negative, Hog 1-1. The threat ring is too dense. You will be shot down. I say again, abort. That is a direct order." Cassidy stared at the digital altimeter. The numbers ticked down as the nose dipped slightly. Her mouth tasted like old pennies. She wasn't having a cinematic moment of righteous defiance. Her stomach was in knots. She was terrified. She knew exactly what a 12.7mm round sounded like when it hit an engine block. She knew what fire felt like. She was acutely aware of the fragile, watery sack of meat that constituted her body. "Viper Actual, Hog 1-1, Cassidy transmitted, completely ignoring the AWACS. "Give me a line." Static. Then, a ragged breath. "Hog, we're done." Adler's voice cracked. The unflappable seal was breaking. The background noise was deafening, the wet tearing of rock, the high-pitched whine of ricochets. They have the high ground. We can't move. Briggs is gone. Samuel is bleeding out. Don't come down here, Cass. You'll just die with us. Just tell Command it's Broken Arrow. Drop the ordnance on our smoke. He was calling an airstrike on his own position. He was giving up. A weird, ugly sound tore from Cassidy's throat. It was half laugh, half sob. The absurdity of it all hit her. She had endured months of freezing in the surf, swallowing seawater, fracturing ribs, just to prove she belonged in their club. And now, the toughest men on Earth were telling her to kill them because they had given up. "Fuck you, Adler," she whispered into the mask, pulling the mic away from her mouth so he wouldn't hear the tremor in her voice. She snapped the mic back. "Viper Actual, keep your heads down. I'm coming in." She slammed the throttles forward. The A-10 didn't dart or dive like a fighter. It lumbered, a heavy, brutal machine made of titanium armor and redundant hydraulics, built around a cannon the size of a Volkswagen. Cassidy shoved the stick forward, and the nose dropped sharply. Gravity hitched. Her stomach floated up into her throat, a sickening wave of vertigo washing over her as the G-forces reversed. The heavy helmet pushed her chin down into her chest. She punched through the cloud deck at 4,000 feet. The gray soup enveloped the canopy. Moisture streaked across the glass in jagged horizontal lines. For 3 agonizing seconds, she flew blind, the altimeter unwinding rapidly. 3,000. 2,000. The radar warning receiver on the dash began to shriek a high, continuous tone. A surface-to-air missile system had painted her. She grunted, muscles straining against the G-suit as it inflated, squeezing her legs and abdomen like a blood pressure cuff to keep the blood in her brain. She broke out of the clouds at 1,500 feet. The valley exploded into view. It was a narrow, jagged V-shape, choked with scrub pines and shale. The air was thick with smoke, hanging low and heavy in the damp air. Directly below, she saw the strobe lights, 2 frantic, blinking infrared beacons on a muddy ridge. Surrounding them on 3 sides were the muzzle flashes of the enemy, winking like malicious fireflies in the gloom. Tracer fire began to float up toward her. From this altitude, they looked like slow-moving red golf balls, lazy and almost pretty, until they snapped past the canopy with a sound like ripping canvas. Thwack thump. Something slammed into the right wing. The jet shuddered. Cassidy's hands tightened on the stick, her knuckles bone white. She didn't feel heroic. She felt a cold, primal panic, scrabbling at the back of her skull. She wiped a line of snot from her upper lip with the back of her glove, her breathing loud and ragged in her own ears. "Viper, I see your strobes," she barked, her voice an octave higher than normal. "Coming in from the north. Danger close." "Too close!" Adler screamed over the net. "You'll hit us!" "Keep your head in the mud, Adler." Cassidy threw the jet into a violent bank. The valley walls rushed up to meet her. She was flying below the ridgeline now, trapped in the chute. The mountains loomed on either side, close enough that she could see individual pine branches thrashing in the jet wash. She was too low. The ground proximity warning system began barking in its cold, automated voice. "Pull up! Pull up!" "Shut up!" she hissed, slapping the warning off. She lined up the nose. The HUD, head-up display, projected a green reticle over the densest cluster of muzzle flashes, barely 50 yards from the SEAL's strobes. The red tracers were pouring in now, a solid stream of hate directed entirely at her. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon didn't fire. It detonated. The sound was a deafening mechanical roar that vibrated through the floorboards, up through the seat, and into Cassidy's bones. It rattled her teeth. The nose of the jet actually decelerated from the recoil of 3,900 rounds per minute. A stream of depleted uranium shells tore into the hillside. From the cockpit, it looked like God had dragged a chainsaw across the earth. Trees vaporized, boulders shattered into dust. The enemy position simply ceased to exist in a boiling cloud of rock and gray smoke. The jet flew directly through the debris cloud. The smell of burned powder and pulverized stone bled through the environmental system, choking her. She hauled back on the stick. The heavy aircraft groaned, the metal airframe complaining as she pulled 4 Gs, trying to clear the opposing ridge. Clang, clang, clang. The bottom of the fuselage rang like a bell, heavy machine gun fire walking across the titanium bathtub that protected her. The master caution light flared on the console, bathing the cockpit in an angry, pulsing yellow glow. The right engine temperature gauge spiked. She cleared the ridge by 30 feet, the belly of the A-10 scraping the top of the pines. Cassidy gasped for air, her lungs burning. Her hands were shaking violently. She looked at the master caution panel. Hydraulic pressure in the primary system was bleeding out. Overlord to Hog 1-1, we show you taking damage. Get out of there, Mitchell. You are pushing your luck. Cassidy ignored the radio. She reached up and wiped her eyes. She was sweating profusely, her flight suit plastered to her back. She banked the jet, fighting the sluggish controls. With the primary hydraulics failing, the stick felt like it was set in wet concrete. Every movement required raw physical strength. "Viper, give me a BDA," she said, panting into the mask. "Battle damage assessment." Silence on the radio. For 3 long seconds there was nothing. Cassidy's heart hammered against her ribs. Had she hit them? Had the spray of 30mm rounds drifted? Then, coughing. Hog 1-1. Good hits, Adler wheezed. He sounded stunned. You wiped out the southern trench. But the DSKs on the east wall are still active. They're reorienting on you. Copy, Cassidy said. Her throat was raw. She looked at her weapons panel. She had rockets, 2 Mark 82 dumb bombs, and a few hundred rounds of cannon fire left. The right engine was coughing, a slight vibration transferring through the pedals. Logic, training, and the manual told her to climb, declare an emergency, and limp back to base. She thought about the seals in the mud. She thought about the trident buried in her duffel bag back in her hooch. They had called her a tourist when she first showed up to BUD-S. They said she wouldn't last the week. Adler had been one of the instructors who tried to break her. Now, he was waiting for her to save his life. I'm coming around for another pass, Cassidy said, her voice dropping, settling into a cold, flat register that she didn't quite recognize as her own. Cassidy, don't, Adler said, dropping the call signs. You're dragging a wing. Your right engine is smoking. I can see it from here. Get out. I said, keep your head down, Adler. She wrenched the stick to the left, standing on the rudder pedal. The A-10 groaned, shedding altitude as she dove back into the gray soup, back into the valley of the shadow. Warning alarms blared in a chaotic, overlapping chorus. Engine fire right. Hydraulic pressure low. Pull up. Cassidy reached blindly to the console, her gloved fingers finding the switches by pure muscle memory. She pulled the T-handle for the right engine fire extinguisher. A dull thump echoed somewhere behind her as the Halen bottle discharged. The master caution light kept burning its angry yellow hole into her peripheral vision. The right turbofan spooled down, dying with a sickening metallic grind that vibrated right through the floorboards and up her spine. She was flying on one engine, dragging a damaged right wing, inside a narrow canyon, and she was dropping. The jet felt different now. The nose was heavy, sluggish, like it was trying to root into the earth. The hydraulic pressure gauge needle rested firmly on the 0 peg. Going manual reversion, she grunted into the mask, reaching for the flight control switch. With a hard click, she severed the jet's reliance on its bleeding hydraulic system. Now, the A-10 was a purely mechanical beast, cables, pulleys, and push rods. There was no power steering. To move the control surfaces, she had to physically fight the air pressure rushing over the wings at 300 knots. She grabbed the stick with both hands and hauled back. Pain flared instantly across her shoulders and down her forearms. It felt like she was trying to deadlift a truck axle. Her bad knee, the one that had ended her ground career, screamed in protest as she stood heavily on the left rudder pedal, trying to counteract the dead weight of the right engine. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes, pooling in the rubber seal of her oxygen mask. It tasted like salt and old copper. Hog 1-1, Overlord, the AWACS controller's voice returned, stripped of its previous slickness. The guy sounded genuinely panicked now. We show a total loss of right engine. You are descending. Climb, Mitchell. Climb and eject. Eject? Eject? Negative, Overlord, she gasped. Her teeth gritted so hard her jaw ached. Every word required physical effort. I am busy. She forced the nose down again, plunging back into the smoke. The valley floor rushed up, a blur of jagged limestone and shattered timber. The smell of the cockpit had changed. The stale coffee and sweat were gone, replaced by the sharp, toxic stench of burned kerosene, melting wire insulation, and the sweet, sick smell of hydraulic fluid atomizing in the air. "Viper, talk to me," she demanded, her breathing ragged. Static hissed. Then Adler's voice, lower now, devoid of the frantic edge it had held minutes ago. It was the voice of a man making peace with the math. We're pinned behind a shale outcropping. 30 yards north of our last strobe, they moved the DSKs. They're on the east wall now. Crossfire. We can't even lift a rifle to shoot back. Dawson is hit. Samuel is unconscious. Cassidy squinted through the canopy. The eastern wall was a sheer cliff face, dotted with shallow caves and scrub brush. I see the wall. Where are the guns, Adler? Can't see them. They're dug in. She needed them to shoot at her. It was the only way to find them. Cassidy leveled the heavy, struggling jet perfectly parallel to the eastern wall, presenting the broadside of her aircraft to the hidden enemy. It was the dumbest, most suicidal maneuver a pilot could execute. She was flying slow, heavy, and predictable. A flying target board. She waited, her hands clamped on the heavy stick, her muscles trembling from the strain. She listened to the rushing wind. She heard her own heartbeat in her ears, a frantic, uneven drum thudding against her eardrums. Come on, take the bait. She thought about Bud S. She thought about Hell Week, sitting in the freezing surf off Coronado, the water draining the heat from her core, her lips blue, her mind fracturing. Adler had been the instructor standing on the beach with a bullhorn, sipping hot coffee, telling her to quit. Just ring the bell, Mitchell. This isn't for you. You don't have the bone density. You don't have the mass. Go home. She hadn't rung the bell then. She wasn't ringing it now. She wasn't going to let the man who told her she couldn't survive watch her fail, and she sure as hell wasn't going to let him die out here in the mud. It wasn't about heroism. It was pure, unadulterated spite. The cliff face erupted. 3 separate positions lit up, angry tongues of flame flashing from the shadows of the rocks. The tracers didn't float this time. At this distance, they were a flat, blindingly fast laser beam of red light intersecting directly with her flight path. Crack, crack, crack. Something heavy punched through the canopy. Shards of acrylic rained down on her helmet, bouncing off her visor. The wind roared into the cockpit, a deafening hurricane that ripped the breath from her lungs. The instrument panel shattered on the right side, glass and sparking wires exploding outward. A bullet had passed inches from her face. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford the microsecond it would take to blink. Now she had their exact coordinates. With a guttural scream, Cassidy shoved the heavy stick forward and left, stomping the rudder. The A-10 groaned, the airframe vibrating so violently she thought the wings were going to snap off. She wrenched the nose toward the center of the 3 muzzle flashes. She thumbed the weapons selector. She had 2 Mark 82 500-pound unguided bombs left. Because her hydraulic assist was gone, the plane was wallowing, the nose drifting lazily, she had to fight the crosswind, wrestling the controls with pure physical force to keep the pipper on the target. Her triceps felt like they were tearing. Wait. The tracers were hitting the armored bathtub around her seat. It sounded like someone beating a metal dumpster with a sledgehammer. The vibrations rattled her teeth so hard, she bit her tongue. Warm blood flooded her mouth. She swallowed it, her eyes locked on the target. She pressed the pickle button. Thunk, thunk. The jet instantly leaped upward, suddenly 1,000 pounds lighter. Bombs away, she whispered, her voice lost to the howling wind in the shattered cockpit. She reefed back on the stick, pulling with everything she had, her boots bracing against the floorboards to gain leverage. The A-10 pitched up, its nose clawing for the sky, the single remaining engine screaming in protest as she pushed it past its thermal limits. Behind her, the eastern wall ceased to be a mountain. 2 massive shockwaves slammed into the tail of the jet. The explosions were a brilliant, blinding orange, quickly followed by churning pillars of black smoke and pulverized rock. The concussive wave threw the A-10 sideways. Cassidy fought the roll, her left arm locking out completely, muscles spasming as she kept the aircraft from flipping inverted into the valley floor. She crested the ridge. Barely. The main landing gear tires actually clipped the tops of the pine trees, sending a shower of green needles into the slipstream. She was out of the valley. Cassidy leveled the plane at 4,000 feet. The sky up here was still that indifferent bruised purple. The contrast was jarring. Below her was hell. Up here, it was just a quiet evening, save for the howling wind tearing through her broken canopy. She checked her instruments, the ones that weren't shattered anyway. Fuel was bleeding out. The right engine was dead. The left engine was running so hot the temperature gauge was pegged in the red. She had no primary hydraulics. Her left wing was riddled with holes, trailing a thin white ribbon of vaporized fuel. She tasted blood and ozone. Her arms were shaking so violently she could barely hold the stick steady. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, and in its wake came a bone-deep, hollow exhaustion. Her bad knee throbbed with a sickening rhythm. She reached up with a trembling hand and switched her radio frequency. Viper. Viper Actual, Hog 1-1. Talk to me. Silence. The hiss of the radio sounded louder than the wind. Cassidy closed her eyes behind her scratched visor. A cold, heavy weight settled in her stomach. Had she dropped the mark? 8-2S too close? The blast radius of a 500-pound bomb was unforgiving. If the shale outcropping hadn't held, she might have turned the men she was trying to save into a red mist. Adler, she said, her voice cracking. God damn it, Adler, say something. A burst of static. Someone coughing violently. Hog. Hog 1-1. Viper. It was him. He sounded like he was speaking through a mouthful of gravel. We are intact, Adler gasped. Eardrums are blown to shit. But we're breathing. The DSKs are gone. The whole damn cliff is gone, Cass. The infantry is breaking contact. They're running. Cassidy slumped back against the ejection seat. A ragged, wet sigh escaped her lips. She didn't cheer. She didn't feel a surge of triumphant joy. She just felt empty. A hollowed-out shell holding onto a control stick. Overlord. Hog 1-1, she called, switching channels. Target destroyed. Troops are secure. What is the ETA on that rescue package? Hog 1-1, Overlord. We have Pedro inbound. 2 HH-60 Pave Hawks and Apache escort. They are 3 mics out. Cassidy. The controller paused. The slickness was completely gone. That was unbelievable. We are tracking your telemetry. You need to bail out. Your bird is coming apart. Cassidy looked at her altitude. 4,000 feet. If she punched out now, the parachute would deposit her right back into the mountains, miles from the extraction point, with a bad knee and a pissed-off enemy force regrouping in the hills. Negative, Overlord, she said tiredly. She wiped a mixture of sweat and blood from her chin. I don't feel like walking today. I'm taking her home. Cass, Adler's voice broke through the radio. He was on the guard frequency. He had heard her. Cassidy. What, Senior Chief? She replied, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. There was a long pause on the radio. Below, she saw the dark, insect-like shapes of the Pave Hawks, darting low over the ridges, heading straight for the strobe lights. The cavalry had arrived. The Apaches were fanning out, their chain guns scanning the tree lines, looking for anyone stupid enough to stay and fight. When you showed up at Coronado, Adler said, his voice slow, measured, fighting through the pain of whatever injuries he had sustained, I said you were a tourist. I said you didn't have the stomach for the meat grinder. I remember, Adler. You made me carry the log alone for 2 miles. Yeah, I did. Another wet cough. You proved me wrong then, but up here, what you just did. He stopped. The tough, unyielding seal, the man who chewed tobacco and spat on weakness, couldn't find the words. Thank you, Mitchell. You brought us back from the dark. Cassidy stared out the shattered canopy. The setting sun caught the jagged edges of the bullet holes in her wing, turning the bare metal into gold. Her arms burned. Her hands were locked into claws around the controls. She felt broken, bruised, and utterly, completely spent. She didn't want his praise. She didn't want a medal. She wanted a hot shower, a bottle of cheap whiskey, and 14 hours of sleep. She keyed the mic one last time. You owe me a beer, Adler. A cold one. Hog 1-1. RTB. She released the mic, locked her eyes on the distant, hazy horizon where the airbase lay, and began the long, agonizingly slow process of wrestling the dying, a 10, back to the earth. The engines rattled, the warning lights bathed her in a relentless yellow glare, and the wind tore at her flight suit. It wasn't a graceful flight. It was an ugly, brutal, stubborn refusal to fall out of the sky. And for Cassidy, that was exactly how she liked it. If this grounded, gritty look into the reality of close air support and the unbreakable bond of the military got your heart pounding, hit that like button. We dive deep into true stories of survival, aviation, and tactical grit every week. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of what human resilience looks like. Sound off in the comments below.